Welcome, Left Reckoners, to another Left Reckoning reading series. Hello, David.
Happy to be here and happy to be doing this again.
I'm glad to be doing this. We haven't done one of these in a while, and we're doing an essay today by a guy named Tony Judt, deceased essayist. He used to write a number of places. Wrote a book called Post-War about the recovery of Europe after World War II into social democracy. That's very interesting and kind of depressing to read now that it's all falling apart. But I would recommend that if people have an Audible credit to spend, as well as the essay collection this one is from, which is When the Facts Change. The original essay, like I said, is Israel the Alternative, published originally in New York Review of Books in 2003. Now, it has been summarized very concisely by former presidential candidate and wave surfing enthusiast John Kerry in this speech he gave as Secretary of State under Barack Obama when he said this.
Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both.
Now, that's difficult for some people to hear if you just follow mainstream media, because you'll see people insist that you need to respect it as a Jewish state and also as a democracy, and not the common sense that is frankly obvious to any disinterested observer of this, that those are contradictory. You cannot privilege one people over another, and call it a democracy. And this is pretty much what this essay from Tony Jut's about. Now, before we get into the actual text, I just want to briefly allude to some controversy about the essay that happened after Judt died, where the New York Review of Books hired somebody to review the essay collection, which is where I first read it. Here's this piece by Mohammed Idris Ahmad. The New York Review of Books is rewriting Tony Jutt's stance on Israel. Judt called for a just resolution to the conflict, not the preservation of a, quote, Jewish state. And we'll just go down to the part that is so basically what Friedland does, a Guardian writer, it says Judt was writing that piece to be provocative. He didn't mean it. It was just to get the idea. It was, as Sam Harris calls it, a thought experiment. And he knows this. Well, the evidence for this is cited here in The Nation. To support his contention, Friedland offers an anecdote. Okay, we're in anecdote territory, which is not typically where you go for strong evidence, but okay. More than a decade ago, so a long time ago, I met Tony Judt for the first time. We drank whiskey in the lobby of a smart London hotel. It struck me at the time that his critics were misreading the essay, or at very least misunderstanding its intent. So it was very controversial among Zionists. And you'll see why when we get to it. A kind of confirmation. So not confirmation, but a kind of confirmation. Came when I asked Judt if he would have published the same piece in the New York Review, not in the New York Review, but in its UK counterpart, the London Review of Books. He paused, thinking through the implications, and finally said he would not. Now, I'll be honest.
Okay, well.
I read those books. I subscribed to the New York Review of Books when I first moved here. I would not know what that meant. Like, that you would do this in the New York Review of Books. And again, this is the first time they've met, so he's asking a very pertinent question and reading between the lines, and not published in the London Review of Books. So Ahmed continues, many conclusions can be drawn from this, but Friedland chooses one consonant with his own assumptions. He downplays Jut's explanation. Quote, the solution to the crisis in the Middle East lies in Washington. My essay was directed in the first instance to an American audience in an effort to pry open a closed topic. But the fact that Judt also admits to being, quote, very worried about the direction in which the American Jewish is moving, end quote, leads Friedland to conclude that this intended audience was American Jews, and in advocating for a binational state, Judt wasn't proposing an outcome so much as using its undesirability to prod them into accepting a lesser compromise. And that brings us back to the John Kerry thing, because I did snip that a little bit close. And what he precedes that with is the conditional, if Israel is to be one state, then it can either be Jewish, it cannot be both. But Kerry wants a two-state solution, right? But we have moved past that. And people have been talking about this, including Judt in 2003 in this essay, that is a fiction. And so who cares? Don't reference it. So that, I mean, I'm curious, David, like just your initial thoughts on this before we get to the text.
I mean, I just think the controversy is ridiculous, and it's not just highlighted in that Nation piece. A lot of people have responded to it because, you know, I also think it's kind of an ugly thing to do, by the way, after somebody has passed, to start saying like, hey, this thing that they're very famous for. Again, for people who aren't familiar with Judt, this was a big deal when this essay came out. He suffered tremendously, socially, professionally, and personally from it. You know, he was refused to, you know, the positions and talks that he gave were canceled. This was somebody who felt the pressure from the Zionist lobby. And it should be noted, this is somebody who came out of that tradition. This is somebody who came out of like the left Zionist tradition to have these criticisms of what was happening in Israel. You know, so this is somebody who took a pretty strong, brave stance at a time when a lot of people were very afraid of kind of talking truthfully about this. And yeah, I think after the fact to say, you know, oh, because he said, which by the way, like, you know, just being a little bit lawyerly and like looking at to what the claim is here, he asked, would you have written the same piece for a different publication and a different audience? And an author and an essayist, anyone worth their salt is probably going to say, yeah, I probably would have changed what I said or how I said it or what I did if I was writing in a different place. It's just kind of what writing is. That doesn't mean, hey, what I wrote in this piece was not something, it was something I don't actually believe, or I was just trying to do it in some kind of sneaky, secret way. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's a kind of a ludicrous assertion, but this is the kind of fanaticism and lying that is just part and parcel with the Zionist movement, especially today, especially in its most rabid form, but it's been going on for a very long time, where people speaking truth are often either threatened and squeezed into changing what they say, or what it is that they're saying is sort of saying, oh, well, you need this kind of context, or you need to have this very, very esoteric interpretation of what they were saying, you know.
I feel for all the people.
Yeah,
I feel for all the people who weren't there for the pregnant pause he delivered to me in a trendy London bar between the first time I met him. Like the idea that an essayist like Judt, who is one of the best that we've had, needs your anecdote in London over drinks that wasn't even explicit, but something you had to imbue with meaning, a pregnant pause that you had to imbue with meaning, is insane. And that the New York Review of Books would allow a essay that was written in their publication to be retconned like that is remarkable. Now let's get to the text, because you'll see why. As we mentioned, like, and a lot of this is familiar. Judt, the ADL, got on his ass, and just to state, he was formerly a socialist Zionist. He's a Jewish guy, and nonetheless, like, not invited because, well, let's get to the text here. It starts off insanely. I mean, look, this is written. I just want to emphasize, this was written in 2023.
2003.
Or 2003, yeah, sorry. Let me make this a little bit bigger here. Israel, the alternative. The Middle East peace let me just start that one more time. Make this a little bit bigger. The Middle East peace process is finished. It did not die, it was killed. Mahmoud Abbas was undermined by the president of the Palestinian Authority and humiliated by the prime minister of Israel. It's Abbas versus Arafat there, the two Palestinian leaders. His successor awaits a similar fate. And Abbas is currently, I believe, Palestinian, what's his title? Second president of Palestine. But, you know, ultimately undermined by, you know, saying, I represent Palestine and I can't get you to do anything about bombing Gaza at any point in history, especially recently. His successor awaits a similar fate. Israel continues to mock its American patron, building legal settlements in cynical disregard of the, quote, roadmap. The president of the United States, Bush, has been reduced to a ventriloquist dummy, pitifully reciting the Israeli cabinet line, it's all Arafat's fault. Israelis themselves grimly await the next bomber. Palestinian Arabs corralled into sinking Bantustans, a South Africa reference, subsist on EU handouts. On the corpse-strewn landscape of the Fertile Crescent, Ariel Sharon, Yasser Arafat, and a handful of terrorists can all claim victory, and they do. Have we reached the end of the road? What is to be done? At the dawn, and this is where he gets into the the fundamentally anachronism of Israel. At the dawn of the 20th century, in the twilight of the continental empires, Europe's subject peoples dreamed of forming nation-states, territorial homelands where Poles, Czechs, Serbs, Armenians, and others might have lived free, masters of their own fate. When the Habsburgs and Romanov empires collapsed after World War I, their leaders seized the opportunity. A flurry of new states emerged, and the first thing they did was set about privileging their national ethnic majority, defined by language or religion or antiquity or all three, at the expense of inconvenient local minorities who were consigned to second-class status, permanently resident strangers in their own home. But one nationalist movement, Zionism, was frustrated in its ambitions. The dream of an appropriately sited Jewish national home in the middle of the defunct Turkish Empire had to wait upon the retreat of Imperial Britain, a process that took 3 more decades and a Second World War. And thus it was only in 1948 that a Jewish nation-state was established in formerly Ottoman Palestine. But the founders of the Jewish state had been influenced by the same concepts and categories as their fin de siècle contemporaries end of the century, contemporaries back in Warsaw or Odessa or Bucharest. Not surprisingly, Israel's ethno-religious self-definition and its discrimination against internal foreigners has always had more in common with, say, the practices of post-Habsburg Romania than either party might care to acknowledge. The problem with Israel, in short, is not, as sometimes suggested, that it is a European enclave in the Arab world, but rather that it arrived too late. It has imported a characteristically late 19th century separatist project into a world that has moved on, a world of individual rights, open frontiers, and international law. The very idea of a Jewish state, a state in which all Jews and the Jewish religion have exclusive privileges from which non-Jewish citizens are forever excluded, is rooted in another time and place. Israel, in short, is an anachronism.
Yeah, I'll just note there. I mean, I really, starting very strong, and I think rooting it and making this argument of actually putting Zionism in its kind of historical, political, economic place, instead of these kind of fake arguments people have, like, oh, for thousands of years, these people have kind of, competed over this land. But actually said, like, oh, no, this comes out of, ethno-nationalist movements that happened all across Europe. And this is a movement that is still, for whatever reason, living on today and doing the kind of horrible things that most people think would be inappropriate for those other states to do. But for some reason, people create a special exception when it comes to Israel.
Exactly. And we see like how nationalism played out too. And, here it is. In one vital attribute, however, Israel is quite different from previous insecure defensive microstates born of imperial collapse. It is a democracy. Hence its present dilemma. Thanks to its occupation of the lands conquered in 1967, Israel today faces 3 unattractive choices. It can dismantle the Jewish settlements in the territories, return to the 1967 state borders, with which Jews constitute a clear majority, and thus remain both a Jewish state and a democracy, albeit one with constitutionally anomalous community of second-class Arab citizens. Alternatively, Israel can continue to occupy Samaria, Judea, 2 terms, by the way, that Bill Clinton used when he went to Michigan for political outreach. And when Zionists start using terms like Judea and Samaria, they're taking that whole shit. Israel can continue to occupy Samaria, Judea, and Gaza, whose Arab population, added to that of present-day Israel, will become the demographic majority within 5 to 8 years, in which case Israel will be either a Jewish state with an even larger majority of unenfranchised non-Jews, or it will be a democracy. But logically, it cannot be both. I mean, there's, like, where Kerry's speechwriter probably got it. Or else Israel can keep control of the occupied territories, but get rid of the overwhelming majority of the Arab population, either by forcible expulsion, or else by starving them off of land and livelihood, leaving them no option but to go into exile. This is what's happened. Yeah. And this is what everybody knew Israel wanted to do before October 7th. And when October 7th happened, if you didn't know that this was the play they were going to run, you weren't paying attention. Mm-hmm. In this way, Israel could indeed remain both Jewish and at least formally democratic, but at the cost of becoming the first modern democracy to conduct a full-scale ethnic cleansing as a state project, something which would condemn Israel forever to the status of an outlaw state and international pride. Now, I just want to pause here and say, does any part of this seem like it's just trolling? Like it's just a thought experiment? This is
No, I mean,
incisive stuff.
Like, this is a perfect section to kind of highlight how absurd it is to sit around and say, like, oh yeah, he didn't mean any of this kind of stuff. I mean, this is kind of bold language, and if it is actually worse. Like, the claim is worse than just kind of denying what it is that he's saying. Very clearly in this piece, Matt, to say that he was doing this as like a troll or messing around means that, like, this is a writer that you should take none of their work seriously, right? Because to talk with such strength in this way, if you're saying that that's just a fake facade that is just sort of put on whenever it's kind of convenient, I mean, you're saying this is a kind of an untrustworthy author, which again is like why that claim is such a nasty, really ugly thing to do about somebody who's passed away. Look
at how useful it is. You don't have to engage with any of the content. None of the content. Because you know why? Because they don't have an argument against this. In 22 years, not even close to sniffing one. Judt continues, anyone who supposes that this third option is unthinkable, nobody should be at this point in history, right? Above all, for a Jewish state has not been watching the steady accretion of settlements and land seizures in the West Bank over the past quarter century, or listening to generals and politicians on the Israeli right, some of them currently in government. The middle ground of Israeli politics today is occupied by the Likud. Its major components is the late Menachem Begin's Harut party. Harut is a successor to Vladimir Jabotinsky's interwar revisionist Zionists, whose uncompromising indifference to legal and territorial niceties once attracted from left-leaning Zionists the epithet fascists, including left-leaning Zionists like Albert Einstein. I don't know if you've heard of him. And Jabotinsky, Betar is the current sort of fascist movement. It's actually the one that was called fascist by like Arendt and Einstein back in the day. They're the ones giving lists to people like John Fetterman and Stephen Miller about who's doing op-eds that's on a student visa. When one hears Israel's deputy prime minister, Ehud Omer, proudly insist that his country has not excluded the option of assassinating the elected president of the Palestinian Authority, it is clear that the label fits better than ever. Political murder is what fascists do.
And that's for people who, when we had Courtney on recently, we played a clip of him denying the nuclear weapons that they've produced. No, we did not do it. We do not do it. So just to remind who that character is.
The situation of Israel is not desperate, but it may be close to hopeless. Suicide bombers will never bring down the Israeli state, and the Palestinians have no other weapons. There are indeed Arab radicals who will not rest until every Jew is pushed into the Mediterranean. But they represent no strategic threat to Israel, and the Israeli military knows it. What sensible Israelis fear, much more than Hamas or the Al-Aqsa Brigade, is the steady emergence of an Arab majority in Greater Israel, and above all, the erosion of the political culture and civic morale of their society. As the prominent labor politician Avram Berg recently wrote, after 2,000 years of struggle for survival, the reality of Israel is a colonial state, run by a corrupt clique which scorns and mocks law and civic morality. I mean, checks out in 2025. Unless something changes, Israel in half a decade will be neither Jewish nor democratic.
And, before we get to this next section, I mean, let's really kind of note how correct he is over what happens over the next 20 years, right? I mean, this is, again, if you are younger, or maybe this wasn't something that you knew much about beforehand, some of these arguments that you see on, online and on television and in public, they might seem kind of new and fresh. No, this has been something that everybody has understood for a very long time, particularly the fact that Israel, if it wanted to maintain its ethno-nationalist state, right, it was going to have to do something about the Palestinian people, right? And you see that, remember that, obviously we focus on Gaza because Gaza is the worst aspect of this, in the sense of just like they're just literally bombing, slaughtering children. But this is what's happening. Similar projects in the West Bank and in Israel itself. The attacks on the political rights of Palestinians, on their social rights, on their basic human rights, right? This is all part of the project to make life unbearable, to exterminate, eradicate people by killing them, or to try to push people out as refugees, because this is something that is incompatible. Having Palestinians as people is incompatible with Israel. as a project, and this has been known for decades. This is why these kind of things, like, they didn't just spring up out of nowhere. These kind of things were frankly planned, right? There was always a hope to have an excuse or a reason to be able to do this.
Absolutely, 100%. A pretext. You know.
No, I just a reminder too. Like, this isn't the first major bombing campaign of Gaza in the past 2 decades, right? And what happened here was Israel felt emboldened, particularly by the Joe Biden administration, that they could keep going. Right. I mean, this is basically what they've said, is they thought that, you know, sooner or later the international community or Joe Biden was going to stop them. And then they found out that no, the United States is not going to, which has created the horrendous circumstances on the ground.
Yeah, and you know, that's the thing is, like, you know, it's interesting Trump where he's at now. It does look like fairly Biden-esque, you know, maybe with a little bit more show of muscle and upright backbone. But you know, and then people would say, like, Reagan did this, made this phone call. And the truth is, those sorts of brief moments that you could allude to are just pinpricks in the darkness of America and the way they've been basically sponsoring this. And this is actually where Judt goes next in the essay. This is where the United States enters the picture. Israel's behavior has been a disaster for American foreign policy. With American support, Jerusalem has consistently and blatantly flouted UN resolutions requiring it to withdraw from land seized and occupied in war. Just fuck international law. Israel is the only Middle Eastern state known to possess genuine and lethal weapons of mass destruction, as we mentioned, they're lying about. By turning a blind eye, the United States has effectively scuttled its own increasingly frantic efforts to prevent such weapons from falling into the hands of other smaller and potentially belligerent states. Washington's unconditional support for Israel, even in spite of silent misgivings, is the main reason why most of the rest of the world no longer credits our good faith. And that was absolutely evident before October 7th, when Joe Biden was trying to get the world enlisted on behalf of Ukraine, and everyone's like, do you think we believe your fucking ass about this sort of stuff? And people were confused about why, about an apparent act of aggression. Don't people trust us? This is the main reason. There's others in our history. This is the main one. It is now, Judt continues, it is now tacitly conceded by those in a position to know that America's reasons for going to war in Iraq were not necessarily those advertised at the time. Many in the current U.S. administration, a major strategic consideration was the need to destabilize and then reconfigure the Middle East in a manner thought favorable to Israel. This story continues. We are now making belligerent noises towards Syria because Israeli intelligence has assured us that Iraqi weapons have been moved there, a claim for which there is no corroborating evidence from any other source. Syria backs Hezbollah and the Islamic Jihad, sworn foes of Israel to be sure, but hardly a significant international threat. However, Damascus has hitherto been providing the United States with critical data on al-Qaeda. Like Iran, another long-standing target of Israeli wrath, who Israel has their sights on as we record this right now, of Israel wrath from whom we are actively alienated. Syria is more used to the United States as a friend than enemy. Which war are we fighting? On September 16, 2003, the United States vetoed a UN Security Council resolution asking Israel to desist from its threat to deport Yasser Arafat. Even American officials themselves recognized off the record that the resolution was reasonable and prudent, and that the increasingly wild pronouncements of Israel's present leadership by restoring Arafat's standing in the Arab world are a major impediment to peace. But the United States blocked the resolution all the same, further undermining our credibility as an honest broker in the world, in the region. America's friends and allies around the world are no longer surprised at such actions, but they are saddened and disappointed all the same. Israel politicians have been actively contributing to their own difficulties for many years. Why do we continue to aid and abet them in their mistakes? The United States has tentatively sought in the past to pressure Israel by threatening to withhold from its annual aid package some of the money that goes to subsidizing West Bank settlers. And indeed, Biden eventually got around to doing a fraction of that, and Trump undid it. But the last time this was attempted, during the Clinton administration, Jerusalem got around it by taking the money as, quote, security expenditure, which is the big lie in governments. Like, there's no money for it, but if you call it security. Washington went along with the subterfuge, and of the $10 billion of American aid, over 4 years between 1993 and 1997, less than 775 million was kept back. The settlement program, I mean, that's again like a fraction. The settlement program went ahead unimpeded. Now we don't even try to stop. And of course, there's brief retreat from Gaza by some settlers, but look at Gaza. So they love to take credit for that for a little bit, can no longer do it. This reluctance to speak or act does no one any favors. It has also corroded American domestic debate. Which is, this part is, I was going to say earlier, this is like kind of the thing I would think Judt was meant and why he published it in an American publication
I have
more
an idea
than
about that.
Rather than think straight about the Middle East, American politicians and pundits slander our European allies when they dissent, speak glibly or irresponsibly of resurgent anti-Semitism when Israel is criticized, and censoriously rebuke any public figure at home who tries to break from the consensus. But the crisis in the Middle East won't go away. President Bush will be conspicuous by his absence from the fray for the coming year, having said just enough about the, quote, roadmap in June to placate Tony Blair. He's a good writer, man. It's very funny. But sooner or later, an American statesman is going to have to tell the truth to an Israeli prime minister and find a way to make him listen. Israeli liberals and moderate Palestinians have for 2 decades been thanklessly insisting that the only hope was for Israel to dismantle nearly all settlements and return to the 1967 borders in exchange for real Arab recognition of those frontiers and a stable terrorist-free Palestinian state underwritten and constrained by Western and international agencies. This is still the conventional consensus, and it was once a just and possible solution. This is of the two-state solution. He's writing this in 2003. But I suspect that we are already too late for that. There are too many settlements, too many Jewish settlers, and too many Palestinians, and they all live together, albeit separated by barbed wire and past laws. Past laws meaning like passports. Whatever the roadmap says, the real map is the one on the ground, and that, as Israelis say, reflects facts. It may be that over 250,000 heavily armed and subsidized Jewish settlers would leave Arab Palestine voluntarily, but no one I know believes it will happen. Many of those settlers will die and kill rather than move. The last Israeli politician to shoot Jews in pursuit of state policy was David Ben-Gurion, who forcibly dismantled Begin's illegal Irgun militia in 1948 and integrated it into the new Israeli Defense Forces. Ariel Sharon is not Ben-Gurion. The time has come to think the unthinkable, and this is the sort of conclusion here. The two-state solution, the core of the Oslo process, and the present roadmap is probably already doomed. With every passing year, we are postponing an inevitable harder choice, and this part stings, that only the far right and the far left have so far acknowledged, each for its own reasons. The true alternative facing the Middle East in coming years will be between an ethnically cleansed Greater Israel and a single integrated binational state of Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. That is indeed how the hardliners in Sharon's cabinet see the choice, and that is why they anticipate the removal of the Arabs as the ineluctable condition for the survival of the Jewish state. But what if there was no place in the world today for a, quote, Jewish state? What if the binational solution were not just increasingly likely, but actually a desirable outcome? It is not such a very odd thought. Most of the readers of this essay live in pluralistic states which have long since become multi-ethnic and multicultural. Christian Europe, Pace M. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, I don't know who that is a dead letter. Western civilization today is a patchwork of colors and religions and languages of Christians, Jews, Muslims, Arabs, Indians, and many others, as any visitor to London or Paris or Geneva will know. Israel itself is a multicultural society in all but name, yet it remains distinctive among democratic societies in its resort to ethno-religious criteria with which to denominate and rank its citizens. It is an oddity among modern nations, not, as its more paranoid supporters assert, because it is a Jewish state and no one wants Jews to have a state, but because it is a Jewish state in which one community, Jews, is set above the others, in an age when that sort of thing has no place. And I believe this is the final little bit here. For many years, Israel has had a special meaning for the Jewish people. After 1948, it took hundreds of thousands of helpless survivors who had nowhere else to go. Without Israel, their condition would have been desperate in the extreme. Israel needs Jews, and Jews need Israel. The circumstances of its birth have thus bound Israel's identity inextricably to the Shoah, the German project to exterminate the Jews of Europe. As a result, all criticism of Israel is drawn ineluctably back to the memory of that project, something that Israel's American apologists are shamefully quick to exploit. To find fault with the Jewish state is to think ill of Jews. Even to imagine an alternative configuration in the Middle East is to indulge the moral equivalent of genocide. This is just, I mean, so there's nothing.
It's
an
old playbook, right?
Exactly. In the years after World War II, those many millions of Jews who did not live in Israel were often reassured by its very existence, whether they thought of it as an insurance policy against renascent anti-Semitism or simply a reminder to the world that Jews could and would fight back. Before there was a Jewish state, Jewish minorities and Christian societies would peer anxiously over their shoulder and keep a low profile. Since 1948, they could walk tall, but in recent years, the situation has tragically reversed. Today, non-Israeli Jews feel themselves once again exposed to criticism and vulnerable to attack for things they didn't do. But this time it is a Jewish state, not a Christian one, which is holding them hostage for its own actions. Diaspora Jews cannot influence Israeli policies, but they are implicitly identified with them, not least by Israel's own insistent claims upon their allegiance. The behavior of a self-described Jewish state affects the way everyone else looks at Jews. The increased incidence of attacks on Jews in Europe and elsewhere is primarily attributable to misdirected efforts, often by young Muslims, to get back at Israel. The depressing truth is that Israel's current behavior is not just bad for America, though it surely is. It is not even just bad for Israel itself, as many Israelis silently acknowledge. The depressing truth is that Israel today is bad for the Jews. In a world where nations and peoples increasingly intermingle and intermarry at will, where cultural and national impediments to communication have all but collapsed, where more and more of us have multiple elective identities and would feel falsely constrained if we had to answer to just one of them. In such a world, Israel is truly an anachronism, and not just an anachronism, but a dysfunctional one. In today's clash of cultures between open pluralistic democracies and belligerently intolerant faith-driven ethnostates, Israel actually risks falling into the wrong camp. To convert Israel, and this is where it gets a little bit practical for folks who often say, like, well, what do you do? And this is pretty much how I've been thinking of it too, and probably because this is one of the first significant pieces I ever read on the topic. But Judt writes, to convert Israel from a Jewish state to a binational one would not be easy, though not quite as impossible as it sounds. The process has already begun de facto, but it would cause far less disruption to most Jews and Arabs than its religious and nationalist foes will claim. In any case, no one I know has any better idea. Anyone who genuinely supposes that the controversial electronic fence now being built will resolve matters has missed the last 50 years of history. The fence, actually an armored zone of ditches, fences, sensors, dirt roads for tracking footprints, and a wall up to 28 feet tall, occupies, divides, and steals Arab farmland. It will destroy villages, livelihoods, and whatever remains of Irish Jew community. It costs approximately $1 million per mile and will bring nothing but humiliation and discomfort to both sides. Like the Berlin Wall, it confirms the moral lot and bankruptcy of the regime it is intended to protect. And final paragraph here. A binational state in the Middle East would require a brave and relentlessly engaged American leadership. The security of Jews and Arabs alike would need to be guaranteed by international force, though a legitimately constituted binational state would find it easier to police militants of all kinds inside its borders than when they are free to infiltrate them from outside and can appeal to an angry, excluded constituency on both sides of the border. A binational state in the Middle East would require the emergence among Jews and Arabs alike of a new political class. The very idea is an unpromising mix of realism and utopia, hardly an auspicious place to begin, but the alternatives are far, far worse.
Yeah, I mean, a brilliant essay, and I just figured it's better to get through it to talk about some of the things that I think are really important. I mean, you know, one of the, I think, fundamental realities here that he's writing about, again, in 2003, is something that any sensible person who is actually, again, like engaging with Israel-Palestine with some knowledge of what is actually happening on the ground versus, again, these kind of like first principle ideas of, oh, this ancient conflict bullshit that people try to, you know, turn this conflict into, is the fact that because of the settlements, because of the destruction across all of, you know, the occupied territories, even if you waved the magic wand and, you know, he was talking about how difficult it would be to like get the settlers to leave, right? But also imagine like and understand like what is going on in those communities. I mean, for decades upon decades, people were unable to build pipes or sewers, to get water into their homes because Israel prevented them from doing that, right? That is decades upon decades of like infrastructure projects that just haven't been done, right? So, what is the result of that even in like the perfect world? I mean, you have an area that is like, impoverished, not just like is dealing with the horrors and the tragedy of what they've been through, but a purposeful pauperization of the population. So to ever sit here and act like that was like real and legitimate possibility, one, because of like the insanity and the commitment of the genocidal regime to prevent that, but just like on an actual material basis, because of what Israel has done, because of what the occupation has been, it is just like, it is such a kind of fantastical idea.
Yeah, and he mentions Jabotinsky there when he's going through the sort of history of the sort of hard right in Israel. And because when I'm reading this, it's like, yeah, it sounds bad over there, man.
Yeah.
And now it's looking like, oh, we're just building Jabotinsky walls, which Avi Shlaim, great Israeli historian, has a book called The Iron Wall. And that's about Jabotinsky, whose basic theory was, we're not being neighbors.
Yeah.
We're building a castle and a fortress here, and no one is going to be able to discipline us at all into being good neighbors. And that's what happened. And that is what we're doing on the southern border right now, too. Like the Fifth Reich here is being constructed along those lines of, we build this here, we have shock troops, political murder even, but like, and our failure, our country's failure to stand up to that has allowed it to, and some of them probably didn't want to stand up to it. I don't believe George Bush would give that much of a shit if he's, I guess he's still alive. What's he doing these days? Right? Like,
they've kicked,
yeah.
Not to give him credit since we were just talking about Iraq, but he actually tried to like get the Republicans to kind of change their tune on the immigration stuff.
That's true.
It became just such a fixation of the National Party, in contradiction to both Bush and also, Rick Perry as well. The big reason why you don't hear from him anymore is because that family has been just sort of like disavowed by the Republican Party in Texas out of loyalty to Trump. So, anyway, it's just like a kind of, but it's not that he's been so committed that he's been actually engaged in fighting against anything. I don't want to misunderstand me to say like he's a bleeding heart liberal.
No, it's just funny that he, like this, and it goes back to Clinton too, right? Like, and so much of the stuff, including like political economy concerns, like our goose is being very cooked right now.
Yeah.
But the preparations have been ongoing for an awful long time, decades and decades, in fact, with very little sort of periods of maybe we shouldn't, we shouldn't be doing this.
No, absolutely. Another thing in that piece that I was thinking about, Matt, because I've seen some morons, relitigating this kind of thing, is the way that he's able to sort of like pull apart those ideas of like the quote Jewish state, right? And actually like get some better understanding of it, because again, like you hear this all the time. Little Cuomo, TV Cuomo, is always going on about like, there's no Jewish state. It's the only Jewish state. There's plenty of Arab states. There's plenty of other states. It's like, no, first of all, Israel's kind of, what are we talking about here with Jewish state? And the way that it is used by like proponents of Israel, proponents of Zionism, is just like a place where like, I guess like Jewish people live, or maybe a majority of people from a certain background live. That dog, what's her name? The Gamergate person.
Wu, Brianna Wu.
Wu, yeah, was going on about, all these people are mad at Israel, but they're not mad about Japan, right? And you have to sit there and think for a second. It's like, obviously this person is, is just like a nasty kind of propagandist. But like to take it seriously for a second, to compare Israel and Japan, is truly bizarre, because there's a big difference between, for example, like a kind of ethnically, homogenous population in Japan, that doesn't allow for a lot of immigration, and like a place where, Palestinians and Jews are not allowed to like walk on the same street. Right. Or, that like the idea that like Japan is like actively engaged in like a bombing campaign against the Ainu people, right? The indigenous people to Japan. I mean, these like this kind of conflation or this muddying of these two things, like what Israel is this an ethno-state that says people from this background have more rights, literally in the Constitution, than other people. Right. Versus a state that has like demographics that have like a certain kind of a majority. Right. Those are actually two different things. Now, the other problem, though, if you do want Israel to be like Japan or like another nation that has like a homogeneous population, well, there is a problem that is just a demographic impossibility.
Right. There's other people.
So both of those fantasies are have like a violent outcome, which is why, yes, people think that there shouldn't be ethno-states in general. And yeah, if by the fact of history, there should be no mandate to kind of like force Japan to like spread its population around or whatever. I would disagree with that. But if what you're saying is like, I want the country I'm living in to have like an ethnic makeup like Japan, what that means is expelling, murdering, pushing out people. And yes, that is a bad impulse as well, friend. And
I would say, move to fucking Europe. Like, I don't know. I gotta say, I want to go to Japan. I think it looks great. I don't want to go there because it's fucking homogenous. One of the things I like about America, I live in New York. I don't want it to be all white people. I think if you want a homogenous community of what is this anxiety? Meet different people. Yeah. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, so I mean, those are old and kind of like tired arguments, and it's just amazing how people continue to trot them out. And the final point that I think certainly probably in large part was popularized by Judt is this idea that like Israel does like actually increase anti-Semitism by its existence, by its horrors, by what it does, and by the claim by Israel that it does represent the entirety of the Jewish faith. That is an issue because it does create actually that kind of slippery slope that people on the anti-Zionist side are always very clear about. But Israel does everything. Israel's the force that tries to do everything that it can to try to muddy that line between Jewishness or the Jewish faith and
Avi Shlaim has made this point pretty clear, I believe, in 3 Worlds, his most recent memoir. Avi Shlaim was a Baghdadi Jew who had to flee to Israel because of the rise in sectarianism after Israel was founded. The point is Israel. Like, nothing changed in the Quran that made all of a sudden the Baghdadi Muslims say, hey, we can't have these Jews here anymore. It was because, Shlaim says like actually Zionist sort of sponsored bombings of Jewish communities, but even the actual violence of Muslims against Jews, that didn't come from nowhere. And the stuff that caused the Holocaust was Christians. And it's such a fucking farce that Germany is like projecting this stuff and Europe is projecting this stuff onto Muslims when y'all were the ones who did it.
Yeah. No, totally. And then, in this state here in Texas, like, where you're literally having people being forced to sign loyalty pledges to this foreign nation, and you have Greg Abbott and all these people talking about the rise in anti-Semitism, and then they're quiet when a mosque right by the University of Texas, 8-minute walk from Governor Greg Abbott's mansion, is defaced with the Star of David throughout. Right, the serious threat, in a place as you are seeing. Where we have seen a violence against, non-white people in Texas in recent years from white nationalists, religious fanatics. That is something that the state should probably take seriously. But you don't hear about it. There's not a focus on that. Instead, there's a lot of attention trying to make sure that like people who say, hey, don't incinerate children, trying to do everything the state trying to do everything they can to shut people up for saying that. That is the focus. And that creates a very dangerous dynamic in society.
And people have died here. The Palestinian little boy killed by his landlord, the 3 students in Vermont shot, and even the Israeli ambassador folks. Like, do you think in a country of this many guns that you're not going to provoke stuff like this over this amount of time? Like, it's just like, and to get like, we need to turn the temperature down. Yeah, we do. and you start over there.
Well,
you start over there.
But it also, Matt, I mean, it's the same thing you were talking about with like the moats and like the fucking the fences and all that kind of shit. When you start doing stuff like that, you have no intention of like peace or like living together or anything like that. When you use the state in the way that they've used the state to kind of shut down protest, when they use their power and influence to try to stop people from talking about this issue, they have no interest in like actually finding, a solution or rectifying this. They just will use their hammer to smash any nail, any problem that they see. They think that they're stronger than their opponents and that is what they're going to lean on to, and the fucking talk about like diversity and the fight against anti-Semitism and all this kind of blather that you get from Republican and Democrat politicians is just the bow on the gun that they have pointed at a child's forehead.
Yep, 100%. And they're smirking about it too. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that essay. Is pretty riveting. And Judd has another good one on the Mearsheimer book, The Israel Lobby, right after this in the essay collection that I reread. And I was going to mention this earlier. This essay was one of the first I talked kind of tepidly with Michael about when broaching the subject early in my tenure. I had never really talked with anyone about Israel-Palestine, like maybe my buddy Chris, but it is first presented to me as a third rail. And then you would occasionally hear a little bit about it. But I remember being a young kid reading this stuff. And it's crazy how well and prophetic it was, really.
No, it's a phenomenal essay. Phenomenal essay.
So we'll link the book. It's hard to find this online, but you should track it down either at New York Review of Books, or maybe I'll try to find a PDF download somewhere. But folks, we'll have another Tuesday show for you in a couple of days. But thank you for joining us for this reading series. Yeah,
and again, come to you can check it out. But the Nation OR Books launch party is happening in New York City Tuesday night as well.
If you're in New York, come through. Yeah.
All right, folks. See y'all. Take care.
Peace.